India's craft traditions and living craft skills have passed on a sense of cultural identity from one generation to the next. It has been a means of sustenance for numerous communities engaged in production. Craftspeople are the backbone of India's non-farm rural economy, and the sector is one that is largely unorganized. Official sources state that there are 34 million people working in this field, but unofficial sources state that this number may be as high as 200 million. This industry contributes $4.48 billion to India's export earnings of $300 billion. Subsequent industrialization has marked the steady decline in crafts and livelihood potential for artisans. Despite the central role played by crafts in the freedom struggle, where Gandhi incited the nation to produce by hand, and subsequent welfare measures implemented by the Indian government, artisans never regained the social status and sustainable income they once possessed. Meanwhile, a culture of excess, exemplified by the wedding market worth $50 billion, continues to grow at an annual rate of 25 to 30% amongst the urban elite. How do we disentangle buying new from the aspirational value of ownership? Can we embrace the simplicity and frugality of preceding generations that valued practices like Rafugiri? With the Fashion Revolution India, we talked about how we can pressurize brands to do more by making less. In this episode, we explore how we as consumers can make do with less. Welcome to this week's episode on Amplify. I am beyond thrilled to introduce our guest for today. She is a lifestyle editor, sustainable activist, special advisor to Global Fashion Agenda, and writer for the Business of Fashion. Formerly editor-at-large and fashion features director of Vogue India, she has for nearly 2 decades reported on the socio-political role of fashion until stepping down to concentrate on advocating for systemic change in the industry. And she is none other than the brilliant Bandana Tewari, who I am speaking to from Bali. No, I mean, she's in Bali, I'm in Bombay, but yes. Thank you so much for being on this show, Bandana.
My pleasure and a privilege. Thank you for having me and spending this time. The COVID times is bringing out a lot of humanity and kindness and compassion, and I'm beneficiary of all the people who are reaching out and asking about what my thoughts are on certain things, and I feel eternally grateful.
Oh, I'm so happy that somebody of your industry level, your industry stalwartness, which I know is not a term, but I just made that up, has decided to speak to me because I'm very new and I'm just approaching this from a place of curiosity, and I'm so glad that you could find the time for this. And so glad that in a weird way, COVID-19 kind of facilitated this. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And as I said, a privilege.
Yeah. So my first question is, you worked for Vogue for nearly 15 years. And I wanted to ask you, can you paint us a little picture about how fashion consciousness has evolved in India since your time in Vogue to now?
Oh, I could write a thesis on this. You know, when I joined the fashion industry and I started working with, first I worked with Elle magazine. I always tell people my training bra was Elle magazine. And I'm very, very, very grateful for that. And then when I went to Vogue, of course, it's an incredible brand to work for. It has opened doors and windows and given me such opportunities to be at the forefront of fashion. And it all happened when India was opening up to the luxury market. So we were at the forefront, not just me, an entire team of people who worked together in Vogue, in Condé Nast India. We were at the forefront of introducing India to the world and the world to India, that kind of thing. So it was wonderful. It has nothing to do with anyone else, but my personal journey started changing over time. I did work with Vogue for almost 13, 14 years. But as I went along, I had my own sort of rumblings of my own heart. This has nothing to do with anyone or any corporation. It was my own my personal journey. And I started feeling a little guilty about how extremely consumerist I was as a person and as someone advocating as a media person. So that started sort of pinching into my conscience. And don't forget, I'm from India. So we are not a Scandinavian country with 7 million people, and everyone is well bred, well fed, and you can
Yeah.
talk about sustainability and elevated thoughts like that. Eat organic food, pay more for organic food, all of that. When you're a small population, we are from a country of more than a billion plus people. So the idea of luxury changes depending on what strata of society you come from. And so I kept thinking how ridiculous it was that so many of my friends, if I may say so, or clients, were willing to buy stuff, beautiful luxury stuff that was worth thousands of dollars and not blink an eyelid, but they would not understand the value of their money if they thought they could put it into making a systemic change within their own society. So you could spend $3,000 on a watch, but you don't think that $3,000 could do something for an education school or for electricity in a village. That money could have added so much more value, but you decided to spend it on a watch. So my journey became very difficult in a very consumerist environment where I kept questioning and reevaluating and introspecting to the point where I thought maybe I just need to distance myself a bit. And it happened when I moved to Bali. I'm a single mom. My daughter goes to a sustainable school here in Ubud called the Green School. Their regular studies is all about, yeah, sure, you need to know your math and your English, but as future citizens of the world, what's your social impact? How are you going to change the world? That's how these kids are studying today. And I felt, my God, as an adult, I need to change my ways and ask a very fundamental question. Whose life am I changing with my creativity, my whatever skills that I've developed over time? I'm not saying I'm good at anything. I'm just saying we all have a little purpose in life, and what was my purpose. So moving to Bali, living in a jungle, being barefoot, fancy free, it became imperative for me to think of a better way of being a consumer, being a participant in the world. It's not that I don't want to buy good things in the world. I do want to buy good designs. I do want to invest in nice things. I love creativity. I know designers who spend so much time creating beautiful things. I know architects who create beautiful homes. Those are all covetable. And we as human beings should, we as aesthetes, we should want to have beautiful things in life, but not at the cost of degrading the environment, not at the cost of humiliating and undermining the ones who are not as privileged as we are. So my journey changed, not out of pomposity, but my journey changed because I truly wanted to just be more authentic as a human being. And that meant I had to make a lot of changes, which was leaving a big city like Bombay, moving into a jungle, leaving a very, very high profile job. Everyone tells me I was on top of my job. What were you doing? This is professional harakiri. Why would you just leave all of it? I just had to, Sanchi. I just had to, not because of any wrath or anxiety towards any human being, or all the gratefulness I have for the jobs that I had, the bosses that I had, the teams that I worked with. I just needed to rediscover and reinstate what my own values were. And so Bali sort of paved the way for me. And perhaps my daughter did, because she chose this school and I didn't want to leave her on her own. And so this was the beginning of a beautiful journey.
That's amazing. And I wonder how, because you hear all of these stories of people who are living in big cities, and very few people get to have the experience that you did at the very top of like the luxury sector in India, working for a brand like Vogue. And for you to sort of then decide that, what, I have to remove myself from the picture, I think is a huge, huge step that a lot of people don't take, or a lot of people don't at least introspect about to the point that you did. And do you remember a certain point in your time when the culture of excess sort of repulsed you?
In all honesty, it didn't repulse me. I had the most phenomenal job. I'm a writer. I may have had an incredibly important sounding designation. I was fashion features director, all of it. But my job essentially was to meet and speak and and interview face to face, one on one, the top designers of the world. So I cannot complain about the nature of my job. I had the privilege of sitting with exemplary designers like Karl Lagerfeld, John Galliano, Christian Louboutin, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Ralph Simmons, Maria Grazia, you name it. I sat with them and we wrote incredible stories together for the magazine. And I can't tell you, it feels like a dream now that I would travel all over the world to interview these incredible souls, very, very creative people. So I enjoyed my time. This is not about how I'm not disdainful of the creative aspect of fashion. I am not interested in fashion anymore that doesn't take into account real, ordinary people who work to make our clothes come alive. So they're not just the designers. There's an entire supply chain that has hundreds of people who are involved, faces and hands that touch every t-shirt that you wear, every hoodie that you wear, every sneaker that you wear. So in my fashion world, it was very gentrified, almost elitist, where we only got the idea that it was the center of the universe of the fashion world was a singular designer. But we know today that that's not it. There is an entire chain of events that take place and people and hands who become invisible in our industry. And so for me, that was the turning point. I just did not want to participate any longer till I understood how I could use my voice to understand the plight and the contribution of millions of people who, by the way, come from our part of the world, India, Bangladesh, most parts of Asia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Indonesia, where we are producing more than 80% of garments for the Western world, the more affluent, developed worlds. And yet we, as a region, decided to make our people, the ones who are toiling, invisible.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was not that I disrespected my job. I enjoyed it thoroughly, but I had to have a distance to be able to understand what is my narrative, my personal narrative within the fashion industry. Is it just about the aesthetics of beautiful products, or do we also talk about regionality, our economy, developing countries' involvement in production, manufacturing, the supply chain that does not address, does not give credit, does not give compensation that is required in this big tamasha of the fashion industry.
Yeah. And I think you made an interesting point over there about how there's like almost two Indias, I think. So there's one India on the side, which, you know, like I'm not going to make any bones about it. That is a class that I belong to and most of my friends belong to and a lot, I mean, we belong to, that can sort of afford these goods that are extremely expensive. And then there's another part of India that actually makes these goods, or even, you know, they may not make the direct good, but they are, you know, I think something like 36 or 37 million people in India are employed in the crafts industry, which is the backbone of India's non-farm rural economy. And the sector is largely unorganized and they don't get recognized for the work that they do, and they don't get their dues essentially. And the middle, I think, is the middle class, which is sort of getting richer. You know, they have more disposable income, and where they may have traditionally had practices of repair or secondhand or mending, they're sort of moving away from that towards the more aspirational aspect of owning new. And so, like, how do you reconcile, or where do you even begin to sort of reconcile all of these different dynamics of India? And to the point where you can actually, honor people who are working as craftsmen or as artisans or as, your local darji.
Yeah, so I think because we are such a layered country, right? It's so layered, it has so many stratas, economic, social, political, religious stratas. We've been indoctrinated in so many ways to sort of toe the line. So if for an aspirational middle class family, if you say, what is a thing of value? The thing of value would perhaps be something that is going to elevate the status of the person who's trying to sort of being more affluent and more gentrified, and more sophisticated, more nuanced, or whatever. So then we start attaching a sense of value not to the craft, as you talked about, not to the technique, not to the skills, but to the thing, the product. So the car becomes more important. The type of watch becomes more important. If it is from a brand from a Western world, it is more important than something that was made within the country. So this indoctrination of the hierarchy of values is what screws us over, in all honesty, because then we forget our provenance, our heritage of creativity. And so we start attaching values that are filtered down from affluent countries to developing countries. So we are somehow towing the line, forgetting our own lineage of aesthetics and following a consumerist agenda that, in all honesty, India did not have. We were a very frugal-minded society. We have grown up with mothers and grandmothers who did not waste. We didn't even have fridges to store food that was overcooked and you had to store too much. I didn't. Even my mother's house, we never used the fridge. What was cooked was eaten. I never remember throwing T-shirts into a bin. There was no wastage. We lived in a Jugaad community, which is make do. You had to reinvent and you had to make do, right? So that was our legacy, and we forgot that because in the hustle and bustle of modernization and urbanization, we started towing the line and taking on the ideals and the ideology of a completely different civilization that did not have much resonance with our own. We are a land of yoga, Ayurveda, homeopathy, naturopathy. We are a land of Vedanta. We were taught to be frugal. It was part of our heritage. And this overt, hyper-globalized consumerism that has taken over India, we have forgotten what our legacy is. We have forgotten what our grandmothers stood for. And so I think that's where our biggest weak point is that we rely too much on the indoctrination from the outside world, and we've forgotten to believe in what was taught, what was practiced for eons in our own culture. And this is not to talk about, this is not being parochial. This is the opposite of being, this is not being inclusive, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about a regionality that is not inclusive. I'm talking about a pride of regionality that is inclusive, that we should be welcoming the outside world into what we have gained through hundreds, thousands of years of civilization, a very sophisticated civilization of India. Our status today in the world is diluted because we don't believe in what we inherited.
And it's interesting because I remember sustainability when it started being a buzzword, and now obviously it continues to be. in Europe and the US and Canada and just the global north in general. And people over there, like you'd have these small brands, right? Where they would, I remember a particular one which was close to where my accommodation was, where my university accommodation was. And this brand, they sold like 3 scarves, and these scarves had hand block printing on them, right? And they were nice, but I know because of my like own heritage back here, I know that you can get much nicer designs, more colorful patterns, and this was not as special. And it cost £1,200. And I looked at it and I literally fell. I was just like, this costs £1,200. And mind you, this is not me saying that I want that scarf from Primark for £5. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying that there is this recognition of our craft and of what our country can provide. And brands in the West, independent brands, have recognized that. And yeah, and so essentially, I just wonder why it is that when we think of aspiration, we think of moving away from our local handicraft and moving towards something that is a global understanding or global recognition of what is acceptable or what is cool to wear. And do you think that there is a specific way that we can reinforce this into our collective consciousness?
What I keep saying, which is what I believe in, is that it's whatever change you want, first has to be a change that comes from personal will. We can keep looking at sustainability as something out there which is so damn vague, and we always expect someone to come and solve the problem for us because we've made it so vague. But if we look at it as some sort of a personal affirmation for change, then there are 2 things that you can do, or maybe several, but in my mind, it's like, A, it is your will that goes out, your individual will to go and do things, buy things, consume things, right? And the second thing is it is your wallet that is being pulled out. So as much hyperbole there is about sustainability and it means so many things to so many people and what have you, I come from a school of thought where personal responsibility, as Gandhi said, personal responsibility for social change. That we as individuals have to go out there and make those changes ourselves before we expect it from our others. And so the 2 ways that we can understand what our own convictions are all about and what changes we can bring individually is, A, what's your intention? What is your intention? Or when you go out to buy something, it is you doing it. You, me, individually. And then it is, again, as I said, the power of your wallet. So personal responsibility is number 1. Else, sustainability will remain as vague as ever. People don't even know the difference between what is organic, green, sustainable. Everything that's organic is not sustainable. Cotton in India is not sustainable. It takes up so much water. Yeah. Farmers are deciding whether they should drink the water or farm cotton with that water. So is a cotton t-shirt sustainable? Not at all. I would rather wear a polyester shirt if I came from a farmland in Rajasthan that has been arid for 2 years because there is no water. And they're haggling about growing cotton, which is the most water-intensive crop in the world. So I think you're better off wearing polyester. And people don't understand. That doesn't mean organic is sustainable. So then all these big umbrella words that come around mean nothing to us. And we distance ourselves from these concepts because they're vague. But if we start looking at sustainability as a personal affirmation, choices that we make in our own daily lives, then it's very simple. Buy less, consume less, watch the power of your money, where you spend it. It becomes something very personal. I have every resource now to figure out what I am buying is sustainable or not. I can go online, I can check the history of the brand, I can see what their CSR policy is.
Yeah.
I can. So personal responsibility for me is key to sustainability. Otherwise, it's just a beautiful, flowery word that we can use and tom-tom around in conferences, but it's how we live our lives day to day.
Yeah. And what does sustainability mean to you? Even though I understand that there is a certain cringe-worthiness to that word now, because I think especially like a lot of big brands like Primark are using, here's our conscious clothing range, and you're like wincing because you know that they've probably cancelled all the orders and during COVID-19 crisis, and they're not at all paying their supply chain workers a fair wage. And there is, of course, the question of greenwashing. But before we get to that, what does it mean to you as a person?
I feel it's a very personal, philosophical, spiritual call to be a better version of ourselves. I'm not saying we should not consume. Our habits as consumers runs businesses, gives jobs to millions of people who need them. So, and we love beautiful things. So it's not about not wanting to buy beautiful things. But if we don't make it into something that is very personal, so going back to Gandhi, when he talks about Sarvodaya, which is welfare for all, that we should not leave someone behind in the welfare of ourselves, that we should indeed understand what it means to have welfare for others in whichever way we live. That's Sarvodaya. Aparigraha, which means we are custodians of the environment. We are not the owners. We are just trustees of the environment. That was one of the 11 vows that Gandhi took, and he lived by it through his entire life, and he imbibed it. Now, they may sound esoteric, but when you start looking at these terms very philosophically, then you are connected to a wider world where my decisions do impact other people's lives. Small decisions, what I buy, what I consume, what I eat, what I wear. People think it's so distant from their lives. But the fact is, these are things that we do every day. We eat, we dress up every day. We're not walking around naked, so clothes do matter. If I told you when you're wearing a yoga pant that is made out of lycra, right? It's probably polyester.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not healthy for you. And, we're like, yeah, but that's the way the world is. But if we could convert that one pair of pants, the yoga pants, and squeeze out the oil and pour it over your head, literally, visually, I can't tell you what impact it would have. That's the amount of oil that you are wearing on your body. So it's lovely to be hippy dippy and say, I'm doing yoga, but we don't even understand what we are wearing on our bodies that are harmful, not only to the universe, but to us individually as human beings. So we need to personalize these stories. How does it affect our lives personally? Sustainability means nothing if you don't personalize it. What you wear. Imagine the yoga pants that is made out of polyester, and imagine it being converted back into the oil that it was made out of. When you start imagining that way with our ordinary choices that we make, then I think we will make conscious choices to change our daily habits individually first. And then it may hopefully become collective. And that could bring social change. But social change is not going to happen if we keep making it into a beautiful bubble that no one really understands. So I like to believe that sustainability personally for me is my daily choices.
Yeah, and when it comes to sustainability and essentially how greenwashing techniques occur with huge companies, What is your take on that? Why do you think that they can put in the energy and invest the resources that they have into marketing strategies that show them as sustainable, but not actually use all of those resources or the minds that they have working for companies like Primark or ASOS or Marks and Spencer or whoever else into introspecting and cleaning up their supply chains, into making the information about the kind of materials they use and about the kind of factories their workers are working in. Why can't they use that resources? Why can't they redirect those resources into creating more transparency and into actually following up on all the promotional activity that they do about sustainability?
Well, I mean, I'm not a marketeer. I'm not the Excel sheet person, but I know for a fact that big companies have profited from the ignorance of their customers. And customers have been debilitated by their own willingness not to learn. Okay? So when marketeers come into our environment, when big brands hire big marketeers to sell us things that we do not need, to sell us things that cost nothing, and breaking the backs of people in developing countries, we don't question it because it's marketed so beautifully to us, right? Yeah. So all these fast fashion brands were like, oh, they'll call some collection sustain or organic or whatever. And we fall for it hook, line, and sinker because we have chosen as individuals not to educate ourselves enough. And we fall into the trap of advertising and marketing. And we will always be conned by the profit-making centers of the world, profit-making companies of the world. I only speak from the point of view of individual choice, individual intention, and individual empowerment. I'm not going to go into, what can companies do to change their ways. I want to focus on what can I do as an individual to change. Yeah. So I have to understand that we've been living in a world which has profited from selling us wares because of the glib marketing and advertising world. Okay? I mean, I grew up with the most incredible documentary called The Century of Self. I recommend that everyone see that documentary because it talks about 1950s when the word public relations was even invented, and it was invented by the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And the nephew of Sigmund Freud used techniques of psychoanalysis that his uncle had developed to work on consumers to make sure that they would consume like we do today. So I just wish that individuals would take on as a personal challenge to understand the way we are individually being conned into a system of consumerism. I can't change the big fast fashion companies. I'm too small. It doesn't matter. That's not even my point. My point is I can change myself. Yeah. And so if you start looking at it from that point of view, then we can start questioning what are the things we are buying, not just fashion. What are we buying? How much are we accumulating? There's a great book called Stuffocation. We are suffocated by the stuff that we buy. Do we really need all that? These are individual choices, individual realizations that we need to have. So I'm not the kind of person who can give you what the changes should be and can be from a very macro level of companies and multi-billion-dollar companies. I don't even know how they run their businesses. It boggles my mind. But I can go micro. I can go micro and tell you individually what we can do.
Yeah. And speaking of individually and what we can do at a personal level, I feel like we have to talk about social media and the way in which all of these social media platforms have seamlessly transitioned into giving you, well, first it used to give you FOMO, and now it's transitioned onto sort of giving you FOMO and then offering you the option to get rid of that by tapping on it to find out the product price that is in the picture and buying it. And I feel that social media is obviously, it propagates and is very much a part of this whole culture of convenience, of this culture of instant gratification. And when you see people who you follow, whether they're your influencers or actors or whoever else, I mean, I feel like everybody on Instagram is an influencer in their own way. How do you turn away from the temptation of, if I buy this makeup kit, or if I buy this item of clothing, or if I buy X, Y, and Z, I can be a little bit more connected to this person, or I can be a little bit more like this person? Like, how do we, within ourselves, find the discipline to turn away from that?
I don't think it's about turning away. We're human beings. We love creativity. I would love to buy something that is made creatively, mindfully, compassionately, something that's everlasting. I think social media, yes, has brought out the worst in us, but at the same time, especially now with COVID times, is also bringing out the best in us. Which other way are we communicating now but through social media? And post-COVID, I almost feel like everyone can sense when someone is being disingenuous, someone is being unauthentic. So when I look at the masses of influencers who profited from the consumerist agenda that was promoted right before COVID, they look facetious now. They look almost irrelevant to what is going on in the world today, right? On the other hand, social media has brought out gems. It doesn't matter. For me, it's not about how many people are being following them or whatever, but it has brought out the gems of creativity. People doing stuff, talking about their truth, the poetry, the music, everything sitting at home.
Yeah.
It's brought out what I keep talking about, this individual will, this authentic creativity that comes out of, like, not really about selling, but about saying. So I have to say, I am actually right now enjoying social media very much. I don't like to get bombarded with there's a lot of shit coming my way, but I can choose the things that I want to indulge in, what I don't want to. But what I find fascinating is that now everyone is sitting in their own homes, contemplating their lives, being creative in the way that they know best. Can't collaborate right now, per se. And so it is their own individual will that's coming out. And I'm enjoying that very much.
Yeah.
And I think sitting at home and being able to be satisfied with a nice meal that you made at home, nothing excessive, being able to talk to not too many people, but the ones that you love, reaching out to ones that you really care for, simplifying. That, I think, is a great awakening for the entire world right now.
And how do you envisage the fashion industry and our own personal habits, because that's what we've been talking about, what comes up. How do you envisage our personal habits to change post-COVID-19?
For me personally, it's consume less, buy less, buy things of value, buy things that have provenance, respect, honoring cultures, especially indigenous cultures, respecting craft, respecting people, faces, hands that are behind the things that we wear. They don't come out of nothing. We've forgotten the entire narrative. We've forgotten the cultural narrative of people who make things that we love. We made product the center stage of everything that we loved. So we looked at a product as if they dropped from Mars. Some alien must have made it. But it's not true. Human beings like you and me crafted them, made them. So I think this is going to, I hope that when we get out of this mess, what we buy is what we are going to respect for the entire trajectory of that product cycle. This, we need to understand the backstory of the things that we buy. And if you don't understand the backstory, if you don't delve into it, don't buy it, because they have no emotional resonance. They are just things. So I feel that to me is mindful consumption, not conspicuous consumption, but conscious consumption, where we understand the provenance of things, people, products, that they don't come out of anywhere. They come out of ingenuity of the mind and of the creativity of human beings like you and me. So they deserve our respect. We need to hang on to the things that we buy, especially clothes, so we don't dispose them that quickly. We don't fill the landfills. We don't hurt the environment. And these are just personal affirmations. I don't need a massive company to tell me this ideology. This has to be my own ideology, something that I imbibe, that something that I am beholden to be a better human being, to be a better version of myself, especially post-COVID.
Yeah. Are you optimistic for what the world can potentially look like once this crisis is over or we're out of it?
Well, sitting from a privileged point of view, I mean, I have all the food that I need. I have a home. I have a lot of things that a lot of people don't have. So sitting from that privileged vantage point, it's easy to be optimistic.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine what it would be for the ones who don't have what I have. And I'm not saying this out of pomposity. I almost feel embarrassed that I have so much and the ones who are suffering have so little. So whose point of view am I looking at? From my point of view, if I were callous, I would say I'm optimistic. But if I was down on the street trying to get home on a bus that has been stopped by the government, I can't get to my village. I'm a factory worker. I'm a daily wager. I have no money. I have to go back to a family. I have to feed the family. How are you supposed to be optimistic? So I find it very troubling. I find it troubling because if people like us, who have all the privileges in the world, don't stand up for those who don't, we are not going to get another chance to save this world. This we must know. If we don't change, we will die. There's a wonderful saying, if you don't change, then you are an architect of decay. And so I think we need to take our roles very seriously, especially the ones who come from a place of privilege.
Yeah. And I think that's incredibly powerful. That's a very powerful sentiment. To that, are there any initiatives from your time working in fashion, from your time working in Vogue specifically, are there any initiatives that you think can be particularly effective in helping craftspeople and helping artisans that you would like the younger generation to take, whether it's through collective action movements, whether it's through entrepreneurship? Are there any specific gaps that you think need to be filled, or sort of challenges that need to be addressed by the next generation?
I think the biggest one is the fallacy of convenience, that just because it's convenient doesn't make it ethical. So I hope the younger generation that come out from especially the millennials and the post-millennials, where things are provided for, the idea of convenience sort of hoodwinks the reality of our world today. And we tend to sweep issues under the carpet because it's just so convenient. I would love at least the younger generation to be more involved in big sort of social media fashion movements like Fashion Revolution, Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah, Extinction Rebellion's great.
Yeah. So I think that's the platform of the youth. They just need to get more engaged and understand why they're being engaged in this, because it affects their lives. We need to personalize these stories. Every time we talk about the destruction of a forest or the Bangladeshi mills are being shut down, we are never told how it affects us directly. But yet we are wearing the very t-shirts that are made by blood and sweat from people in countries that are living in a world that doesn't believe in living wages, sanitation, healthcare, labor protection. All those things are not associated to the fancy shit that we wear. And we need to have that narrative going. Every t-shirt is made out of resources that come from different parts of the world, different people who touch it. It could be buttons from China, embroidery in India, stitching in Bangladesh. We forget the trajectory of the very clothes that we wear, however ordinary they may be. So for me, it really is, again, going back to this personal quest and the personal curiosity to become better human beings. And that can only come if we as individuals put our foot forward individually. Can't wait for the government to tell us to do it. We should do it ourselves.
I think we're going to end it there, Bandana. I'm so happy that you came on board. And I think that you should write a book, because at the beginning of our podcast...
I'm lazy.
Yeah. No, but I feel like you have such an articulate and eloquent way with the way that you speak, and it's just so profound. I think I'm sort of like, I feel like this great therapeutic truck just hit me, and I think you should put your words down, because I think it would make a brilliant book. So please consider this.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that marks the end of this week's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find all the relevant links and handles to know more about our guest this week in the episode description. If you have any feedback, suggestions, requests, or simply just want to get in touch with us, then please do head over to our podcast website. We are available to flag and say hi to via Facebook, Instagram, or email. Thank you, and see you next week.